Bandai's been making plastic models for a very long time. With this in mind, one would expect them to be very good at what they do. And for the most part, they are. But not always. Every once in a while they screw up and they put out a kit with some major problems. When this happens, the general Gundam fandom almost immediately picks up on it and they shun all variations of said model and dissuade newcomers from building it for years after its release. However, there are even rarer occasions where one or two rushed or otherwise inaccurate reviews portray a kit in an excessively negative light, and then that gets carried by word of mouth throughout the whole community. This can destroy the reputation of what may in reality be a great model, or at least an okay one. So in this new sub-series of Gunpla reviews, I'm going to provide a closer, in-hand look at the supposed worst of the worst to see if they really deserve the hate they get. And if a kit turns out to actually be as bad as everyone says it is, well, in those cases I'll explore some potential fixes and modifications that can raise it to greatness, or at the very least make it not completely suck. I'm Second Soundwave, you're watching Channel 2S, and I think the Master Grade Regia Z deserves a second opinion. So I forgot to write this in the script, but this actually wasn't the kit I was originally going to start this series with. However, I was talking with my friend Dan the Plastic Man about what I had kind of in mind for this new series of reviews, and he thought it was a great idea, and he said he wanted to send me something to kick it off with. So he sent me the Master Grade Regia Z, and you know what? I'm glad he did. Thanks, Dan. So one phrase you'll be hearing a lot in this video is, "for the time," because this kit was originally produced back in 2001, and those days Master Grade engineering was pretty far from where it is now. Universal hips didn't exist, torso and ankle movement was an afterthought, full inner frames were basically unheard of, and the general level of detail didn't really exceed what was seen in the source material. So if you go into any kit from this era expecting an Origin RX-78 or a Freedom 2.0, you're gonna be disappointed. However, if you know that what you're getting is a simply detailed, mostly static display piece, you'll more often than not find yourself pleased with the end result. The Regia Z is a good example of an early 2000s MG. It's light on the surface details, but it still maintains a faithful level of color separation. Now admittedly, I've never been a huge fan of the Regia Z, so the design doesn't do much for me. But I can't deny that it is a very accurate rendition, even if the colors aren't exactly what I would consider pleasing to the eye. That said, both the design and the colors have grown on me a lot after building the kit for myself, so if you too aren't a super big fan of the Regia Z, it might be worth giving one of the models a try. But while the color separation and sculpting are very nice, there is one visual blight on this kit. The seam lines. They are everywhere, running down the entire length of the arms, and also the sides of the torso. There's also this one on the head, which is by far the worst one. It looks okay when you squeeze it together, but moving the head too much will leave you with a really ugly gap. I cannot recommend seam welding this enough. But despite this being an older Master Grade, it still has some nice interior detail. The cockpit opens very easily, and he's got both a little pilot sitting in the cockpit and a second one that's standing. But he doesn't have anything to stand on, so you should probably glue a little bit of plot plate to his feet. One thing that I found really interesting is that the armor panels on the legs are actually attached by polycaps, which seems to imply that you're supposed to remove them, and sure enough, when you do, there is some very nice interior detail under here. I think that's a really cool idea, and I'd kind of like to see more kind of open hatch style gimmicks on newer Master Grades. So aside from the seam lines I just talked about, probably the biggest strike against older models like this is their articulation. The Regia Z's head is very restricted. There's this hose underneath that pops off a lot, and I would recommend cementing this in place for sure. Alternatively, you could also leave it off completely and just cut the attachment pegs for it, which will give you a little more room to move the head. And it's also worth noting that while it is difficult, the head can be rotated past the edges of the collar, you just have to be super careful. Still, this is far and away the worst articulated part of the kit. The shoulders can come out to here, which, for the time, was perfectly fine. However, we've now come to one of the only major issues that this kit has. See this polycap? This is way smaller than it should be, which means that the kit can barely hold its arm out to the side. And since the joint is so undersized, I kinda doubt that floor polish would really be a help here, although it is worth still giving it a try. Fortunately, this is really only a problem once you add on the shield, as the joint is strong enough to support the bare arm. Below the shoulder there's a full bicep rotation, and below that there is a double jointed elbow. Now the range is somewhat limited, but he can do the double O Gundam cheat and bend his wrists far enough up that you can still get that 180-degree bend. Kind of. Speaking of his wrists, there is a lot of movement in his hands. There's this hinge and ball socket combo at the wrist, and then the hand itself has a very nice palm hinge, and the fingers have that classic 1.0 3-finger trigger finger thumb design. I have to say, there's a lot more going on here than I expected. So moving down to the torso, there's just a single swivel at the waist, and then the tail, as well as the thrusters on the backpack, are removable. The hips have an okay front to back range, and the knees have a really nice bend. And then since the hips are ball jointed, this is really all you're going to get for outward movement. There isn't that much of a rotation either. The ankles have a good amount of forward and back movement. And even though it looks at first like there's not enough ankle tilt, you can actually rotate the toes to get that extra range you need. It's still not a lot, but it is enough to keep his feet flat no matter how spread his legs are, which is ultimately all you need. So while it's no GM Sniper 2, the Regis Z hits pretty much all the points it needs to. With a kit this old, the most you can hope for is enough mobility to get the kit into a natural looking stance, and the Regis Z does that just fine. It's also very stable on the ground, and if you have an action base, it looks even better. Now the kit itself doesn't have an adapter, but if you use the largest claw in the action base one, you can hold it on the base just fine. But there's only so much you can do with an unarmed mobile suit, so let's take a look at what he's got for weapons. Starting with the ones already on his person, he has a grenade launcher in both arms. Now these work just like the ones the Zeta has, where you slide this little piece forward to pop out the grenades. They need some paint, but they're still pretty cool. He's also got more artillery hidden in his hip skirts. I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the articulation, but these side skirts can both rotate like this and also swing out a bit. And then there's this little switch underneath them, and when you slide it forward, these little missiles pop out just a bit. It's not super impressive, but it's a nice touch. So moving back up to the torso, there's these little hatches on the backpack, and when you slide them open, it deploys the beam sabers. I really like how it's got like this complicated sliding mechanism instead of it just being a little hatch you lift up. I also really like the sabers themselves. Now this pair just lifts out of the backpack very simply, but these aren't the ones you're going to be using in his hands, because the Regis Z actually has a second pair of handles that you put the beam effects on, and I really like how these sabers look. If you compare them with the storage handles, you can even see how they're supposed to open up for the blade. It's a shame these ones don't open up like that, but it's still a really cool design. When the sabers are in his hands, the only thing holding them in place are his fingers, since there's no hand pegs like what you'd see on a newer kit. Now before I actually built the kit, I thought this was not going to work at all, but surprisingly enough, the fingers are actually really strong and have no problems holding anything. I personally think they're even easier to use since you don't have to line anything up, you just stick the handle in the hand, you wrap the fingers around it, and you're good to go. I mean, if you're trying to knock them out of his hands, they'll come out, but they certainly aren't going anywhere on their own. And despite what you may have heard, the same actually goes for his rifle. I mean, yeah, you kinda have to snake his arm around the stock, but that's not really a big deal. I don't know about you guys, but this is what I consider to be a solid connection. However, not every weapon this kid has is perfect. With the shield equipped, he can only just barely reach the handle with his hand when it's on his arm, but fortunately that's not a big deal since the arm peg holds onto it just fine on its own. The bigger problem with the shield is a more weighty one. Remember how I said earlier that the shoulder polycap was too weak to hold up the shield? Well, I wasn't kidding. If you try to raise his arm like this, when the shield's on, it just... yeah, not great. However, that loose polycap only affects outward movement. You can still pose the arm like this with the shield across the body, and he has no problem doing that. So even if you don't tighten up the joint, it's still not the end of the world. So that's all the Regis Z's weapons, but there's still more to see here because this kit transforms. Well, kinda transforms. I'll show you. Okay, so to start the transformation, you're going to want to fold the toe down just like you would on the Zeta Gundam, and then you're going to take the whole foot ankle section and you're going to push it up, and that'll also slide up that little thruster cover on the back. Then you want to take the knee and then kind of double joint it forward so it looks like this. Now you're going to want to lift up the front skirt, lift up the back skirt, lift up this little catch underneath the back skirt, and then you want to take the hip joints and swing them up. Then close everything back up, close up these little fins on the back. Then you want to unlock the shoulder pad by pulling it out so it's all nice and loose, and then you fold this flap up and let it droop down, and then you rotate his arm so his elbow's facing forwards, and you want to just kind of double joint his elbow forwards just like this, and make sure the hand's kind of rolled underneath here. And make sure you have these little hatches opened up in the shoulders. And now that you've done all that, he should look something like this. So now that that's done, you're going to want to take the shield and you want to fold this in, and then you sort of just kind of set the rifle in here, and then you take this piece and you clip it over the top just like that, and that kind of holds the rifle in place. And then this little piece kind of goes over the back here and just pegs into a couple holes in the back of the shield. Now you take these two polycaps, stick them onto these two pegs. Now I don't know if I've showed you this yet, but this is just kind of a separate flight unit that you're going to use to make the Regis Z transform. So what you want to do is you want to open these little flaps up here so the shield's kind of hanging down a bit. And then you take the Regis Z, and now you just want to kind of slide the Regis Z in here, and then let it just kind of, these pieces just kind of drop down over those teal parts on the back. And now is actually a good time to mention that you get two sets of antennae with this kit. You have a rubberized pair that I have in the kit right now, and you have a hard plastic pair as well. Now the hard plastic pair is better for painting, but if you are planning on transforming the kit, I really recommend using the rubberized antenna. Otherwise, there's a very high likelihood of you breaking these as you're transforming the kit. So now at this point, you want to take these little gray sections, and there are little tabs under them. You just want to push those tabs down into the poly caps on the shoulder. And they can have some trouble going in there. And if they're really giving you a lot of trouble, you can just leave them out, as there's actually a really secure lock-in right back here. And then you want to take this section and you want to make sure it's all closed up. And then you take these little tabs on the inside of the shield here and you want to hook those into his legs. And then from here on out, it's just a matter of kind of moving stuff around, straightening and adjusting things, and you are pretty much done. So the Regis Z's transformation was pretty simple, but the added flight parts keep it from looking too wingy. I'm personally a huge fan of this mode, maybe even more so than the mobile suit. I might have even found myself displaying this permanently in flight mode, except that I can't, because there's nowhere to put an action base. But that's okay, because you get this thing. Never in my life have I seen a worse display stand than this. It's literally just two sheets of plastic slotted into each other, and you're supposed to just rest the shield into the indentation on the top. Except that there's nothing to hold the smooth round shield in the smooth round divot, so surprise surprise, it's not staying in here for any amount of time. I mean, sure, you can still just set the kit directly on a shelf, but with a flight mode like this, it really does deserve better. So before I started this build, I had an idea of what I thought I was getting myself into. I was even going to make a follow-up video to this one where I was going to fix all the problems I was expecting this kit to have. But other than the usual seam welding, panel lining, and top coating, there's really not anything this kit needs. The shoulders are weak along one axis and the flight stand is trash, but that's really it. Everything else wrong with this kit is just par for the course when you're digging this far back. The only thing I'll add that I haven't said already is just a warning for the customizers out there. This kit goes together very tightly, so if you plan on painting, modding, or even just seam welding this kit, I really recommend that you trim the pegs to make disassembly easier. I neglected to do this on this copy and I'm already regretting it. But yeah, bottom line is that the Regis Z is not a bad kit. Now granted, it's not amazing, so I'm not going to say that you need to get one right now, but if you like the Regis Z and you understand what you're getting yourself into, then yeah, go ahead and pick one up. See how you like it. After all, only you can accurately tell what you will and won't like. I'm just here to provide a second opinion. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, I'm Second Soundwave, and I'll see you next time. Take care, guys.